racial equity. And you can find out more about us at uuare.org. uuare.org. And our mission really, I have a couple of our business cards up here, but I don't know. Laura, you have more of them?
Yep.
Excellent. So our mission really is to build a movement within Unitarian Universalism to confront and dismantle white supremacy in ourselves and in Unitarian Universalist culture. That's our goal. And we do that in lots of incremental ways, and this workshop is one of those. So please come join us. We've got a lot of curriculum. We'll talk about a little bit later about what some of that curriculum is as well.
So to just give you a quick overview of this session and the concurrent section, the one that will run from 4:30 to 5:30. This session from 3 to 4 is an overview of the formal consensus-based decision-making process, why you might choose to use consensus, and some hands-on practice with some elements of that style of decision-making. We'll be here during the break, so from 4 to 4:30, we'll be here. We'd be happy to have ongoing conversation with anyone about any questions or concerns or practice, role-playing, anything like that. And then when we start at 4:30, the second part, the digging deeper part, we'll look at consensus-based decision-making using an anti-racism lens. So talking specifically about attributes of white supremacy culture, and how that can disrupt decision-making in general, and how it impacts consensus. So that's the plan. Also, we have a printout of a basic PowerPoint that contains kind of the seeds that we're going to plant today. We don't have a lot of time, so we're going to go through some things really quickly with the idea that we'll follow up with you. We have all the resources available for you that will be available online, and we're happy to continue that conversation individually or with groups, informally or through more formal consulting opportunities through ARE in the future. So rest assured.
Yeah, and obviously we are environmentally conscious as well. We didn't want to kill too many trees. There were a lot of paper up here for you, but all of the resources are going to be available for you online as well. We are e.org.
Just again, Governor.
Raise hands high if you still need a handout. We'll make them give to you.
So I guess part of one of the things we want to talk about today too is training enough, right? One of the things that we have a tendency to do, I know I have a tendency to do that. I'll use I speak. I'll tell you this is my experience in large part with Unitarian Universalism as well, is we want concrete answers. I want a concrete answer. I want a button I can push that says, I'm done now, right? I want a certificate that says I've learned what I needed to learn, right? And so training can often feel like that, particularly if it's not presented in a way that says this is a lifelong educational experience, right? Becoming anti-racist and living out an anti-racist belief system in your everyday life is an ongoing process. You're always going to be learning, hopefully. And so we try and really emphasize that there's no one class you can take and say I'm an anti-racist, right? Where there's never a certificate that you get a stamp of approval and say, yay, I'm done, right? I think one of the challenges we had, and I still think it's a challenge with the welcome. How many people here are their congregation is a welcoming congregation? Right. How many times have you looked at that curriculum since you became a welcoming congregation? It is not uncommon. I know my congregation was like this in the brick and mortar world when I was a member of a brick and mortar congregation. I say brick and mortar because I'm now a member of Church of the Larger Fellowship, which is online, and you can be both. Please come CCLFUU.org as well. is that was, we're a welcoming congregation. Well, we did that 10 years ago, and we haven't looked at the curriculum since. And we certainly haven't evaluated our committees and our board structure and all of those things in light of being how we welcome people, what it looks like when somebody comes into our congregation in light of being a welcoming congregation. So my point being that it is, it's an ongoing process. It should always be an ongoing process of learning, hopefully.
We get more skilled at screwing things up
Amen.
ourselves, right? So, always something new to learn. So before we dive into a little bit about decision making, I just want to touch on briefly that how we structure our organizations impacts how we make decisions. So we have very hierarchical structures in our organization. We don't have a lot of shared power. How is consensus or coming to consensus going to work in an organizational structure like that? So we're not going to talk more about that, but that's just a little seed to think about. How we're organized impacts how we go about making decisions. So just by a quick show of hands, how many folks are feel pretty practiced at using consensus, use a lot in a lot of different spaces that they live in? Awesome. So I just want to talk a little bit about why choose consensus over other styles of decision making. What other kinds of decision making processes do we find or use? Sometimes we have no process. There's no clear process. You come into an organization and it's really not clear how are things being decided here. Sometimes you just have unanimity. You kind of have a natural unanimity where everyone sort of agrees, and you can call that consensus, but you may never have had to compromise and build and come to consensus through collaboration. So that's a little bit different. And then the one that we're often most familiar with is some kind of majority rules style of voting. And I just want to talk a little bit about the history, general history or traditions around consensus and more kind of group-centered decision-making. You can find the style of decision-making all over the place throughout history. The most common things that probably people will talk about are folks like the Quakers, indigenous groups, family structures, our own family structures, the participatory democracy movement, like Ella Baker and civil rights movement related, direct action, consensus style decision making. So there's a lot of experience around this type of decision making. I think that for me, the thing that's important to me and what I really value about consensus is that it's about consent. When you hold majority votes and you have a contingent that votes no, and you move forward with your yes folks, your yes plan, the no votes are now having something happen without their consent. And so what I love about consensus is this striving to collaborate, especially when you have a shared vision. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's important when you're using consensus. But I find that's one of the things I really love and find really beautiful about consensus is building through collaboration, resolving conflict, which is awesome and exciting, and coming to something that in the end that most everyone feels good about, feels like a win-win. And then a lot of times through that collaboration, you create something that when you started, you didn't even know was possible. So what we'd like for you to do in the next few minutes is to think about a time when you were involved in some kind of decision-making process. It could be something simple and like what are we having for dinner? We have mac and cheese, we have canned beans. We compromised, we went with cheesy beans. Mix it all together. Or something more complicated. So really kind of whatever comes to mind for you. A situation where you really went into something feeling like you weren't sure how it was going to turn out. You felt like maybe you were on the losing end. But through some kind of collaboration, you created a solution that was a win-win for you and for others. So I want to give you just a moment to think about that for yourself, and then we're going to have you do a little bit of a pair and share. So hopefully, you're in little pockets of 2s or 3s where once you kind of think of something, you can share with your seat buddies how it made you feel.
And these don't necessarily have to be places or times when you have engaged in consensus-based decision-making, right? I think all of us have at some point in time. Amy pointed out a variety of different areas where we use it. In family life, we use it all the time, right? But it may also be another time that you were involved in a decision-making process, and perhaps it either didn't go your way, or it went some way that there was some conflict in the room, or whatever it might be for you. I don't want you to limit yourselves to the idea that it just has to be about consensus. What we're trying to do is to get an idea in the room for you guys of what has decision-making been for you in the past, and what are good things and bad things that might have come out of that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
There really should be musical interlude here.
Go with me to that land, to that land. Didn't know you were going to get floor show, did you? Go with me to that land. All right, so why don't we take about 10 minutes, 5 minutes?
2 minutes.
2 minutes? We have a limited amount of time. The only challenge we have is we have been informed by the hotel that if we move any of the chairs, we will literally have a reset fee that is in the hundreds of dollars. So you can't move the chairs. But hopefully you can move yourselves, those who can, and those who are mobility challenged, stay where you are, and someone will
2
come
or
to
3
you.
minutes, kind of just share on your feelings. Share on your feelings. You don't need to necessarily go into the details, but kind of share your feelings. Thank you. partnering with each other. So we're going to talk a little bit about sort of what we call the recipe for success when it comes to consensus. So there are some qualities of your organization and your structure that will help set you up for smooth running consensus process. We're going to run through that kind of quickly, and Jim's going to add some context. The context. So common goal, unity of purpose, agreed upon mission and vision. If you're not in agreement,
You slow down a little bit.
I can slow down. If you don't have a sense of common purpose and you don't have agreements as to your goals, it's really difficult to make decisions with consensus.
Yeah, I can't emphasize how important, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, how important mission and vision is. If you have not heard Ginny Porter's last moderator's report, do yourself a favor, find it online. One of the things she quotes is a quote out of the Bible, right? People without vision shall perish. Right? And vision is very important. It should be the grounding for all the work that you do. And then in conjunction with that is, what is the mission for the organization as a whole, and then how do we covenant together? And if you're not working within that framework, it's very easy for you to get into a place where you cannot find consensus.
Other elements, respect, trust, a commitment to reach consensus, entering in with the idea that we are going to come to consensus. Nonviolence, conflict resolution, procedures, options, cooperation, a sense of cooperation, sufficient time. So consensus can happen, it can happen quickly. It can be super efficient, especially using the formal process. And sometimes it requires.
That's right. So you notice that we negotiated around time, right? We had talked about what we were going to do together, and then we needed a little bit extra time, so we negotiated for that. Recognizing that that's going to limit what we can do in the hour, right? So that's how we operate within ARE. If we're going to go over a time period, we ask the group, can we do that? And we will consent around yes we can or no we can't. And if we can't, then that's great. And often what we found is when we can't, it's because our agenda is too full or we haven't done the groundwork ahead of time, right? So when the proposal comes forward to be talked about, the groundwork hasn't been done, and now it's going to devolve into a long conversation, right? So part of the time, managing the time properly, and it is important that we do that. But it is also important to recognize, I think, that time can also be another way in which we marginalize people, right? Everybody has a different sense of what time means to them. My wife and I, maybe the largest challenge we have in our marriage is that for Carolina, everything takes 20 minutes, whether that's an hour and or 3 hours, or if it's 5 minutes, I can get it done in 20 minutes, right? And I have come to learn what that means. We've negotiated around, and I have eventually come to her point of view because that's the way it works. But that being my point, right? If we were to have a conversation, if we were to have a conflict, and time was an issue, I know that 20 minutes means something different to her than it does to me. And that is particularly true when we talk about cultural competency, right? If we're working with people from different cultures, the way they interact with time is different than the way white, European, heteronormative, patriarchal culture does. So it's important to keep that in mind.
So some other elements, real clear process. Like we talked about earlier, the process for the decision making isn't clear, it's murky, it's problematic. Active participation. Ongoing practice and training. So, and especially when you bring in new folks, not assuming that it's going to be real easy for them to slide into this role that maybe you've been doing for a couple of years and you feel real comfortable with, making space and time for that. A sense of responsibility, personal responsibility, good facilitation, and equal access to power.
Yeah, I was just thinking as Amy was talking, often we hear from folks, boy, I love consensus-based decision making. How do I make that happen in my congregation? I want a board to do this. Well, that's really problematic, right? This is a cultural shift, you know? And so take it incrementally, right? Maybe in a committee that you're a member of, talk about using consensus-based decision making. Does that make sense? And little by little, as you get more and more leaders in your congregation into the habit of using consensus-based decision-making, then eventually it'll leak up to the board, right? Or you have a board that says, we're gonna do this, and they're on board, and they do the whole process, right? And I will also say that we don't think necessarily consensus-based decision-making is right for every group, right? You may have some groups that we do in ARE who operate using a different model in their group. But we as a whole use consensus-based decision making. Does that make sense?
And lastly, using an anti-racist, anti-oppressive approach